He ruled his restaurant like a king, barking orders as if life was his personal stage. Then, a woman in a janitor's uniform walked in, and his perfect world started to crumble. Nobody saw it coming, but that moment turned into his worst nightmare. Let's start from the beginning. The Silver Fork restaurant, perched on the third floor of a pricey office complex, was buzzing with its usual morning chaos. Manager Eric Johnson, mid-40s, immaculate suit, and a grin sharp enough to slice bread, was in his element. His idea of leadership, barking orders and pointing out everyone's mistakes like he got paid extra for it. Today, his target was a young waiter who'd spilled coffee on a perfectly polished table. "Do you even have eyes, Jeremy?" Eric snapped, his tone oozing condescension. "Or do you just enjoy testing my patience every single day?" The waiter mumbled an apology, scrambling to clean up the mess. But Eric wasn't done yet. Oh no, not until everyone within earshot knew who was in charge. As Eric berated Jeremy, the door to the restaurant swung open, and in walked Angela Brooks. She was in her early 50s, wearing a simple but spotless uniform, a badge of her supposed role as a janitor. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and her gaze held a quiet dignity that was hard to miss. She wasn't here for the food or the scenery. She had a mission: conduct a surprise cleanliness audit on behalf of the regional office. The moment Eric caught sight of her, his nose wrinkled as if he'd smelled something unpleasant. In his mind, people like her, by which he meant janitorial staff, shouldn't even be visible, let alone walking confidently into his pristine domain. Without missing a beat, he marched over, a storm of indignation brewing behind his too-perfect smile. "Hey, you!" he barked, loud enough to make heads turn. Angela stopped and looked at him calmly, but before she could speak, Eric launched into his tirade. "What are you doing in here? Can't you see we've got customers? This isn't some back alley for your buckets and mops." "Good morning," Angela replied, her voice steady, her expression unreadable. "I'm here." "Morning? Oh, no, don't good morning me," Eric interrupted, stepping closer, as if his presence alone could make her vanish. "This is a high-end establishment. You don't just stroll in here like you own the place. Get out, now." Angela tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just enough to give the impression she was re-evaluating him. "Are you sure you want to talk to me like that?" she asked, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge. "Talk to you like what?" Eric practically spat. "Listen, you've got two choices. Leave voluntarily, or I'll call security and have you escorted out." The restaurant fell silent, save for the muffled giggles of a few patrons who found the scene entertaining. Angela, however, remained unfazed. She simply nodded, turned on her heel, and walked away. Not toward the exit, but down the hall toward the staff corridor. Eric froze, blinking in disbelief. "What the? Where does she think she's going?" he muttered under his breath before storming after her, his polished shoes clicking angrily against the tiled floor. The dining area buzzed with whispers and speculation. No one knew what Angela was up to, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just some ordinary janitor with a mop and a bucket. And for the first time in a long while, Eric's perfect little world was about to get messy. Eric Johnson was fuming, his temper bubbling over like a pot left too long on the stove. He stormed down the narrow corridor, his polished shoes clapping loudly against the tile. How dare she? How dare Angela, some nobody janitor, walk off like she owned the place? It wasn't just insubordination, it was a direct challenge to his authority. And Eric did not take challenges lightly. Behind him, the faint whispers and suppressed chuckles of his staff only fueled his fury. He could feel their eyes boring into his back, waiting for the fireworks. "Oh, they think this is funny?" Eric muttered under his breath. "Hey, you!" he bellowed, his voice echoing down the corridor. "Stop right there! I'm not kidding!" Angela kept walking, cool as ice, like she hadn't heard him. She reached the door to the utility room, opened it, and slipped inside without so much as a glance his way. Eric caught up seconds later, barging in with the force of a small hurricane. The door slammed against the wall, rattling the shelves and causing a stack of glassware to clink dangerously. "What the heck do you think you're doing?" he barked, his face red with anger. "You can't just waltz in here like this." Angela finally turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, calm, composed, but with a flicker of something deeper, something Eric couldn't quite place. "And what exactly do you think I'm doing, Mr. Johnson?" she asked, her voice smooth as butter. "My job?" Eric sputtered, caught off guard. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not like this. "Your job?" he repeated, his voice climbing an octave as he gestured wildly at her. "Your job is to clean the floors and stay out of the way, not parade around the restaurant like you run the place. Do you even know who I am?" Angela didn't flinch. Instead, she fixed him with a steady gaze that felt more like a spotlight than a look. "Oh, I know exactly who you are," she said, her tone clipped but polite. "You're the manager of this restaurant, and now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very tight schedule to keep." Eric took an instinctive step back, her words hitting him like a slap. That one word, schedule, hung in the air like a storm cloud. His mind raced, piecing together the implications. Schedule, audit, inspector. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice faltering for the first time. "Are you saying inspection?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Angela replied, her composure unshaken. "I'm Angela Brooks, Senior Sanitation Inspector for the corporate office. Your restaurant is on my list today." For a moment, it was as if the world stopped spinning. Eric's face drained of color, his thoughts spiraling into chaos. An inspector? Here? Now? No warning? No heads up? He tried to collect himself, forcing a tight, nervous smile. "There must be some kind of mistake," he stammered, his usual confidence crumbling. We weren't informed of any inspections. And besides," he trailed off, glancing at her uniform, then back at her face. His tone shifted, laced with barely concealed skepticism. "You don't exactly look like an inspector." Angela's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a sleek ID badge, extending it toward him. "I think this will clear up any doubts," she said, her voice carrying a razor-sharp edge. Eric's eyes flicked to the badge. His breath hitched as he read the details. Angela Brooks, Senior Sanitation Inspector, official seal of the company. This couldn't be real, but it was. Eric stuttered, sweat beading on his forehead. Angela slid the badge back into her pocket, her smile fading as her expression turned serious. "Now," she said, folding her arms, "you have two options, Mr. Johnson. You can show me the state of your restaurant, or I can skip straight to the report. Your choice." Eric opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, and for the first time in years, Eric Johnson felt something unfamiliar: fear. The atmosphere in the tiny utility room was electric, charged with the tension of a battle Eric had already lost. And for Angela, it was just the beginning. Eric stood frozen, his mind racing, his face twisted into an unreadable mix of rage and disbelief. His world had shifted in an instant, and he wasn't ready to let go of control. But instead of swallowing his pride and trying to salvage the situation, he leaned into what he did best: bluffing and bluster. "All right, listen," he started, yanking at his tie, as if loosening it would somehow restore his shattered confidence. "I think we got off on the wrong foot here. Maybe you don't fully understand how things work around here. I'm the one running this restaurant, and—" Angela didn't even let him finish. "And I'm well aware of how restaurants like this are run, Mr. Johnson," she cut in, her tone cool and precise. "In fact, I'd wager I understand it better than you. Now, why don't we start with you showing me the sanitation logs and giving me access to the kitchen?" Eric blinked, caught off guard by her unflinching response. His usual tactics, intimidation, deflection, weren't landing. He hesitated, the weight of the moment sinking in. If she was here to dig, there was plenty for her to find. "Fine," he muttered, trying to regain some shred of authority. "But you need to understand, this wasn't exactly expected. A little heads up next time, and we'd have everything in perfect shape." Angela's gaze didn't waver. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice slicing through his excuses like a knife, "you know full well that inspections are unannounced for a reason. If there's anything out of order, that's on you. Now, shall we?" She gestured toward the kitchen with an air of finality. Defeated, Eric nodded stiffly and led her down the narrow hallway toward the heart of the restaurant. Along the way, the staff parted like the Red Sea, their eyes darting between Eric's stiff posture and Angela's composed demeanor. A few exchanged amused glances, others whispered behind their hands. Everyone knew the unshakable Mr. Johnson had met his match. The kitchen was chaos disguised as functionality. A couple of employees scrambled to straighten up, hastily wiping counters and shoving pans into drawers. But no amount of quick fixes could hide the glaring problems: improperly stored food, unmarked containers, a refrigerator humming loudly with its door slightly ajar. Angela took it all in, her eyes sharp and focused as she made notes on her tablet. Eric hovered nearby, wringing his hands and muttering half-hearted explanations. "We've had unexpected delays with maintenance," he said, pointing at the refrigerator, "and, the staff has been under a lot of pressure with the morning rush." Angela didn't acknowledge his excuses. Instead, she moved methodically through the space, opening cabinets, checking temperatures, and inspecting every corner. Her silence only made Eric's anxiety worse. When they reached the employee restroom, her composure finally cracked. "Just a little." "This," she said, gesturing to the clogged sink and the rust-stained tiles, "is completely unacceptable. You're not even meeting basic standards. How do you plan to explain this in your report?" Eric opened his mouth, then closed it again, the words sticking in his throat. There was no explaining it. He'd been too focused on micromanaging his staff and basking in his perceived authority to deal with the actual problems under his nose. Angela turned to face him, stepping closer. Her voice dropped to a steely calm. "One more thing, Mr. Johnson," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "Your behavior today, the arrogance, the condescension, will also be included in my report. I'm certain the higher-ups will find it enlightening." The blood drained from Eric's face. He could handle a bad inspection, maybe even spin it as a one-time oversight. But his treatment of Angela, now laid bare, was a ticking time bomb. His reputation, his career, it was all unraveling. Days later, the Silver Fork was closed for renovations, a bold red sign taped to the front door. Inside, the staff milled about, discussing the fallout with a mix of schadenfreude and relief. Meanwhile, Eric sat alone in his office, packing up the last of his belongings. The official notice of his termination had arrived that morning, signed in neat script by Angela Brooks. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a message. As he stuffed his awards and neatly labeled files into a cardboard box, Eric replayed the events in his mind. He could see every moment where he could have changed course, spoken differently, acted differently, but it was too late. His pride had been his downfall. Angela had left the building days ago, but her words echoed in his head. "Your behavior today will be reflected in the report." For someone who'd built his career on appearances, the irony was devastating. Eric Johnson had been exposed, not just as a bad manager, but as a man undone by his own arrogance. And as he walked out of the Silver Fork for the last time, he realized the most bitter truth of all. He had no one to blame but himself. How would you have handled the situation if you were in Eric's shoes? Do you think he could have turned it around, or was his fate sealed from the start? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever experienced something like this? Let us know how it turned out. Don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you and share it to spread the message. This story is meant to shed light on real issues and inspire positive change. By discussing these moments, we can all take steps to create a better, more understanding world. Your voice matters. What you share can help make a difference. Let's make kindness and respect the standard, not the exception.